as it is related to the development of the universe from the moment of creation onward. So first of all, conditioning. We're speaking of the conditioning of the mind. So in the Western psychology, there is a very well-known term called conditioned reflex. And this is supposed to have been discovered by a Russian scientist named Ivan Pavlov. He was studying dogs. So when he brought food for the dogs, at the same time he rang a bell, so that the dogs associated the arrival of food with the sound of the bell. And so naturally, when food is brought before dogs, if they're hungry, they salivate. So after a few of these test runs, he stopped bringing the food. So he noticed that the dogs had been conditioned, this is the term. They had been conditioned to associate the bell with the food. So even though no food was brought before them, as soon as the bell rang, they began to salivate. So this is understood as conditioned reflex. In the Bhagavad Gita, the word nibadnati is used in the 14th chapter, and this word is also translated by Srila Prabhupada as conditioned. And if we look at the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we actually find that the sense of the word conditioned is the same. Of course, we're not talking just about dogs. We're talking actually about the soul. The soul in its consciousness is conditioned by Maya, by illusion. Now, let's look again at the dogs. They hear the bell and they associate with that sound with food. Now, it's food that will satisfy their hunger, not the sound of the bell. But they become conditioned to associate the sound of the bell so strongly with food that they respond to the bell as if it was food. But obviously the bell is not going to satisfy their hunger. This is the sense that we're focusing in on here. The meaning of conditioning and how it is explained in the Vedic scriptures, that the living entity, the spirit soul, as we've been explaining previously, Anandamaya Vyasat is stated in the Vedanta Sutra, that our nature, the nature of the Supreme Consciousness, is that of bliss, and since we are part and parcel of that Supreme Consciousness, that Anandamaya Purush, Sri Krishna, then also, as Prabhupada writes in his purport, we are after happiness also. That is, the seeking for happiness is natural to us. We are looking for happiness to find fulfillment. So the living entity becomes conditioned by Maya, by the illusory potency, to accept something which will not satisfy his desire for happiness. But he accepts it. So Maya has two Shaktis. Prakshitatmika Shakti and Avarnatmika Shakti. So these two Shaktis, one is that Maya diverts us from the real goal of happiness, is offering us something like the sound of the bell instead of the food, offering something that attracts us but will not satisfy us. So this is the first phase of her conditioning, this consciousness of the living entity. And then once the living entity is so diverted and is pursuing this false goal, then Maya weakens that living entity, weakens his resolve, weakens his spiritual sense of himself. So that even though this false goal does not satisfy the living entity, he nonetheless accepts it out of weakness. So this, then, I already mentioned to you how addiction is also a very good analogy for us. So this is where that comes in. Because this is exactly what happens in addiction. That a person seeks happiness in some drug, for example, or alcohol. But this is not going to make him happy. Obviously not. But nonetheless, his associating with that false goal, that drug, taking the drug again and again, it weakens him so that he can't give it up. It becomes a need. And it becomes an ever narrowing, his scope narrows and narrows and narrows and narrows until his life is most wretched and abominable. Drug addicts, you just have to take one look at them and you can see how much in suffering they are. How their life simply moves from, as they say, fix, and they stick the needle in the arm, heroin addicts. Now they have other kinds of drugs too that people get addicted to, but heroin is a good example. So their life is just one fix after another. And in between, it's just a scrabble to try to get the money together to get the next injection. So very low, miserable life. It's not making them happy, but they're unable to give it up because the drug is in them, like a poison, has weakened their resolve, weakened their determination. And so Maya acts upon the living entity in exactly the same way. But as Prabhupada said, the addiction to Maya is much more formidable than any addiction to any drug, actually. Srila Prabhupada once said, in the very early days when his first disciples, those who were first coming to hear him, would tell him about what they had been doing, their involvement with drugs, LSD. And Srila Prabhupada said, he commented once that LSD and drugs like that, they are simply spice in the real drug, which is Maya. It's just like spices, you see, with spice in food. So that adds something, a little bit of flavor. But the main thing is the food itself, the preparation itself. So that is Maya. So, this is our introduction to conditioning. Now I want to read some key verses. This will help us to understand how it is that a living entity whose original nature is to be Krishna conscious, how we can come under the influence of Maya. So first, Taittiriya Upanishad. This is a verse I quoted yesterday in the Sunday feast lecture. Rasovai saha rasam hiyavayam lubha nanandi bhavati kohiyavanyat ka pranyat yad esha akasha anando nasyat esha hi esha nandiyati. This means that the supreme truth, God, Krishna, is rasa. And rasa means taste. So again, everyone is looking for happiness. Everyone is looking for a taste in life that will satisfy them. So this verse says, the Supreme Lord is that taste which we're all anxious to attain. The jiva becomes blissful upon attaining this rasa. Who would work with the body and prana, sensory powers, if this blissful form did not exist? He gives bliss to all. So let's be very clear on what this verse is saying. He gives bliss to all. So there are those who are seeking the bliss of association with Krishna directly, the devotees of the Lord, chanting His holy name, experiencing Chinmayananda, transcendental happiness. So obviously the Lord is their bliss. But even those who are in material consciousness, who do not care for spiritual life, for this search for happiness in God, they're seeking happiness in material things, the bliss that they are tasting is also Krishna. Without him, bliss would not be. This is very, very important to understand. Now, someone may say, well, if Krishna is the bliss for the devotee and the bliss for the non-devotee, the alcoholic or whatever, then what is the difference? So the difference is, Rupa Goswami explains that Krishna is Akila Rasamrita Murti. Akila means complete. And Kila means incomplete. So when one goes directly to Krishna, and then he obtains complete happiness. The happiness that will yenatma suprasidati, will actually satisfy the soul. In the material world, that happiness, material happiness, is called Kila Rasa. It is incomplete. It again is enough pleasure is there to condition us. Like the dogs are conditioned by the sound of the bell. And enough pleasure is there to weaken our resolve to go anywhere else seeking happiness. But there's not enough pleasure to satisfy us. So, the Srimad Bhagavatam says, Sheta kalvasya bandhaya mukte chatnomatam guneshu saktam bandhaya vatam vapungsi mukteye. The stage in which the consciousness of the living entity is attracted by the three modes of material nature is called conditional life. But when that same consciousness is attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is situated in the consciousness of liberation. So there is one type of happiness, spiritual happiness, which is experienced in liberation. That means in freedom from the bondage of birth and death. And there's another kind of happiness, which is the very process of bondage. And because we're attracted to material happiness, which cannot satisfy us, and our desires are ever go on and on, unsatisfied, therefore we have to take birth again and again. Because we're always struggling, life after life, to satisfy desires which cannot be satisfied in this material world. And if you're looking for an explanation for that, again, the analogy of addiction. It is not logical, but there it is. So, Nunam Dairena, this is also Srimad Bhagavatam. Nunam Dairena Vihata, Ye Chakchuchikata Shudham, Hitva Shunvanti Asadgata, Purisham Iva Tadbhuja. Such persons, this means persons who are addicted to material pleasure, are condemned by the Supreme Order of the Lord because they are averse to the nectar of activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are compared to stool-eating hogs. They give up hearing the transcendental activities of the Lord and indulge in hearing of the abominable activities of materialistic persons. So now here, hearing is stressed. Hearing is the first of our senses. I was explaining yesterday how everything begins with sound, the evolution of creation. So sound moves in the finest of the material, gross material elements, ether. And from the movement of sound and ether, then the sense of hearing and the sense, the ear, are manifest. So we find again and again in the Shastra, when it talks about sense experience, often in a verse describing sense experience, it begins with the word Shravanadi. And Shravanadi means beginning with hearing. And often this word is enough. Shravanadi then stands for all the senses and their perceptions that follow. So everything begins with hearing. So this verse is indicating that our conditioning or our liberation begins with hearing. So what one has a taste to hear about, that is the indicator of whether we're in spiritual or material consciousness. If we have a taste to hear about Krishna, then that is indicating spiritual consciousness. If we have a taste, as this verse says, to hear mundane topics, the narratives of mundane people, then our attraction is to the material world. And this verse says, that such person who has that sort of taste, then he's Daivena Vihata. He's condemned. By Daivena means God. Deva means God. Deva, Krishna is the God of gods, the Supreme Personality of God. So they are condemned by the order of the Lord. So this relates with Raso Vaisaha, that he is Rasa. That the condemnation is that their attraction, ultimately it's an attraction to Krishna, but it is this lower attraction. Attraction to hear not the perfect original topics of Krishna, but the reflected, perverted topics. Everything begins with Krishna, but we can be directly or only indirectly attracted to Krishna. And then, next quotation, Kamastat agre samavart tadhi manaso retha utmam yadasit. In the beginning there was desire, which was the primal germ of the mind. This is from the Rig Veda. So, this verse is explaining that creation is beginning in desire. From out of this desire, the mind appears. And then from the evolution of the mind, then the gross material creation begins. So now we have come to the topic that we wish to go into now, the relationship of our mental processes to the greater universe, the creative process of the universe. So the Vedas speak of creation in 4 stages. And these 4 stages are equivalent to the 4 stages of consciousness, which I've explained in an earlier lecture. That there is Turiya, first of all. Turiya means the 4th stage beyond the modes of nature. This is otherwise called the Brahman stage. And in terms of our Vaishnava philosophy, this is called Vasudeva Sattva, or Shuddha Sattva. Pure goodness, goodness beyond material nature. And this is the original position of the spirit soul. The spirit soul is originally located here, in Brahman, in Brahma Bhuta, Brahma Bhuta stage. The material existence is called Upadi Bhuta, when we take on designations, like this body is not ourself, it's a designation of ourself. So the state when the soul is free from all material designations, this is Vasudeva Sattva, Brahman or Turiya. So, Vasudeva Sattva refers to Vasudeva. Vasudeva, who is Vasudeva? This is Krishna, when he expands beyond his Raja Lila, his Vrindavan Lila. The Krishna who goes to Mathura, the Krishna who goes to Dwarka. That is not Gopal Krishna, he's always in Vrindavan. But this is his majestic expansion, Vasudeva. Vaikuntha, the Vaikuntha Dham, the majestic realm of Almighty God, Narayan. This is also generated by Vasudeva. You may know of the incarnation Lord Ramachandra, who has 3 brothers. So Ramachandra is the original Vasudeva. And Ramachandra has 3 brothers, Vishnu Tattva, brothers. And so they are Shankarshan. Shankarshan appears in Ramlila as Lakshman. Then Pradyumna, he appears as Shatrughna in Ramlila. Then Aniruddha, he appears Pradyumna appears as Bharata in Ramlila, and Aniruddha appears as Shatrughna in Ramlila. So, 4 forms of Godhead. This is, we find all throughout the Shastras. Vasudeva, Shankarshan, Pradumna, Aniruddha. This is called the Chaturvyuha. So, Sankarshan, so this Chaturvyuha, just like in Dwarka, Krishna, Vasudeva, he's Dwarkadesh, the Lord of Dwarka. His brother there, Balaram, is Shankarshan. Pradumna is Krishna's son, Aniruddha is Krishna's grandson. This is how they appear in the Dwarka Lila. And these 4, Chaturvyuha, they also appear in creation, in the Mahatattva. So first of all, we've already explained Vasudeva, who predominates over Brahman, the pure state, unadulterated by the modes of material nature. So then his expansion is Sankarshan, who appears within the Mahatattva as Mahavishnu. So, with Mahavishnu, then we have the appearance of the primordial Tamoguna, the primordial mode of ignorance. Actually, very closely associated with Mahavishnu is Sadashiva. Sadashiva is the archetypical Lord Shiva. So he is directly the Lord of this primordial mode of ignorance. So what is going on here? That Sankarshan or Mahavishnu is lying in a kind of sleep, Yoga Nidra. This is transcendental sleep. He is transcendental, and in that sleep he is sporting with Rama Devi, who is his internal pleasure potency. The jivas, those living entities, who with Vasudeva, who are in the pure state of Vasudeva consciousness, are now under the mode of ignorance. You see, the qualification for coming into this, getting entangled in this material creation, is a desire to imitate the Lord. So just as Mahavishnu is lying in Yoga Nidra, sleeping, so the living entities are also sleeping, but their sleep has a different quality. They're actually in the mode of ignorance. They're in a state called Susupti, which means total unconsciousness. And they exist in that state for many actually we really can't speak of, it's very hard to speak of time at that point. We can only really count time after the universal process has begun. So we're speaking of before the manifestation of the universe. So it is, time is not yet, material time has not yet come out. But you can get the idea that this is for a very, very, very long time, practically seeming like eternity. The living entities are in this state of primordial ignorance. Now, there is relationship here with our own consciousness now. I've just spoken to you of 2 of 4 stages. So let's just pause and see how these relate to us. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, I've read the verse already, I'm not going to read it again. Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto points out that since we are spirit soul, that Vasudeva consciousness, that pure consciousness is there. It's always there. Yeah? And I've explained this, how light, even after light becomes colored, red light, blue light, you see, light is light. Light is actually by itself always clear. Water by itself is always clear, although it can become colored. So similarly, our consciousness is in essence always pure. So Vasudeva consciousness is there, but it is covered, it is hidden. Just like here's a light, so we could lay a heavy cloth over this light, bind up, wrap a heavy cloth around this light, and then we wouldn't see light anymore. If this was the only light in the room would become dark. But the light is still there. It's just covered. So similarly, our pure consciousness is there, Vasudeva consciousness is there, but it's covered. So the first covering is this primordial ignorance, this total absence of awareness of anything. Now every night we're going into that dreamless sleep. And the Vedas, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Vedanta Sutra, other Upanishads, they actually tell us, and a very interesting thing, that at this time of dreamless sleep, the living entity is actually returning to Mahavishnu. Now, we may think of Mahavishnu, he's very gigantic, very far away. But you see, these Purushas, these expansions of Vishnu, they're also, while they're different, they're also the same. This is our philosophy, Chincha Bheda Bheda Tattva. So the living entity returns to the embrace of the Lord in the heart, particularly this Mahavishnu feature, who is the Lord of the Achit Shakti, this Shakti of unconsciousness. And so this is a kind of Brahman realization, but Brahman realization in primordial ignorance. So when the soul returns to that unconscious state, dreamless sleep, he's rejuvenated. This is actually what gives strength to the mind at night when we sleep, by entering into this Sushupti state. So you see, we have right now that experience of this Sushupti. And this is the stage prior to creation. Now looking at it in another way, psychologically, in the microcosmic scale, in our own consciousness, I've already told you about the subconscious. And we've explained how desires are coming out of the subconscious. So this Susupti state, this is that subconscious. This is the root of the mind. The root of the mind is this primordial ignorance, which means ignorance of ourself as spirit soul, and of course ignorance of Krishna. And this root of the mind, it's termed the Karana Deha, the causal body. It is the cause of our subtle body, mind, intelligence, false ego, and I'll be explaining in a few minutes how that arises out of the Karana Deha. And it is also the cause of the gross body. Mahavishnu is also called Karana Dakashai Vishnu. Karana means causal. He lies in the causal ocean. So the subconsciousness, or Karana Deha, it is primordial ignorance, but it is also cut off from all mental processes and physical processes. So there are great, in yoga actually, there's an equivalent state called pragya. The yogis, when they withdraw their consciousness from the senses, it's called pratyahara, and they concentrate their minds. This is called dharana, and they enter meditation, dhyana, and finally they achieve samadhi. They're passing into also this susupti state, in trance. This is a state of trance. So they're no longer in touch with the mind, the intelligence, the false ego, or the sense perceptions. And then from this state, samadhi, then they can go into the turiya state. So this is another interesting point. So the root of the mind is embedded with desires. Our material desires pervade this karana deha, this subconscious. And these desires, they need to come out. So this is happening. You see, there is the macrocosmic version of these events. with the creation. First there's Vasudev, then Sankarshan, Mahavishnu, lying in sleep. The jivas are within him. They're in susupti, unconsciousness. But by associating with the Lord, their desires are awakened. You see? As I said, the Lord in his consciousness, he's enjoying Yoga Nidra. So the jivas are associating with him indirectly. So he's enjoying, so the jivas also want to enjoy. But now they're under the modes of nature, they're under the mode of ignorance. So their desire for enjoyment, it comes out with the Rajaguna, with the appearance of the Rajaguna, the mode of passion. And now we have to speak of the next expansion of the Lord, in the Chakravyuha. This is the Pradumna expansion, whom in the Leela of creation appears as Garbhodakashay Vishnu. So, Garbhodakashay Vishnu, with his appearance, his other name is Hiranyagarbha. So he is the Lord of what's called the Vyakta Mahatattva. The Mahatattva, Mahat means primordial intelligence. And tattva means reality. Reality or truth, or ultimate ingredient also. So the Mahatattva is the metacosmic display of all of the ingredients of creation. And these are listed in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 13th chapter. This is called the field of activities. And there are 24 parts of this field of activities. This is the Mahatattva. So this is interesting. Field of activities also means our own body. See, our own body is like a local microcosmic Mahatattva. But there is a great metacosmic. It means even beyond this one universe that we're in, because there's many universes, unlimited millions of universes, and all of them are drawing their design, their own pattern and plan from this great Mahatattva. So, Hiranyagarbha, the Lord of the Mahatattva. Now, Mahavishnu, he is the Lord of what's called Avyakta Mahatattva, or Pradana. The Mahatattva, when it is not manifest, when the ingredients are not on display, when everything is just held in potential only, this is the Mahavishnu's state of creation. But when the universes come out, then, as they're coming out, Mahavishnu expands into each one as Garbhodakashay Vishnu. And then there's a great display of the causal ocean of this great Mahatattva, first universal form. So this is subtle creation. We find again and again in Srila Prabhupada's purports, he is using this term subtle Hiranyagarbha, or subtle Garbhodakashay Vishnu. So subtle means linga sharira, the subtle body. This is where the mind, intelligence, and false ego are manifesting on a great cosmic scale. So the whole creation is first of all appearing in subtle form. This is the idea. Just like now coming down to the macrocosmic scale, our own individual identity, our desires. First, where do they appear? First of all, in the mind. Bhagavad Gita, Jeto Vishayapum Sangateshu Pajayate. Sangat Sanjayate Kama. So first of all, we contemplate the objects of the senses in the mind. And by associating with them, then calm, desire becomes stronger and stronger. And with the strengthening of desire, so Rajaguna, the mode of passion, is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. So this stage of existence is in the mode of passion. And it culminates within each universe with the appearance of Lord Brahma. This is the culmination of this this next stage of creation, which is called the Ishvara stage, by the way. No, sorry, Hiranyagarbha stage. Yes, this is Hiranyagarbha. Taijasa. Taijasa means creative intelligence. And the consciousness associated with this is Svapna, dream sleep. So Mahavishnu, the consciousness associated with him is dreamless sleep. So dreaming sleep. And this is when our desires become manifest. Yes, so then the culmination of that is the appearance of Lord Brahma from Mahavishnu, from Garbhodaksh's navel. There goes up a lotus, it opens, and there is Lord Brahma seated in the middle of the lotus. He's the Rajoguna avatar, the demigod in charge of the Rajoguna. So what does he do? He contemplates the great Hiranyagarbha, the Vyakta Mahatattva. He is meditating on this subtle form of creation, and then he does the work of manifesting the gross creation. And that means within the lotus stem are all the living entities who are also coming out of the body of Garbhodakasha Vishnu. And they have their desires, so according to their desires and to their karma, he's giving them bodies, he's embodying them within the universe. They receive physical bodies by which they can satisfy their desires. So this stage of consciousness is ahamkara, is jagrata. Jagrata means wakefulness. And this is where the ahamkara comes into play, because now the living entity is identifying with the body. Ahamkara means the false ego, false identification with the body. Now there's a body. So this is the fourth stage of creation, called Virat. We're moving from Hiranyagarbha now, Hiranyagarbha stage to Virat stage, or Vishva, the manifest universe. The consciousness is Jagrata, wakefulness. So when the living entities receive a body, then simultaneously within their heart is expanding the super soul, Paramatma. Chirodakasha Vishnu. He has his slated meat planet here within this universe. He's lying on an ocean of milk, and he's expanded within the heart of every living being, and from him is coming knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness, so that these living entities can use these bodies to satisfy their desires. So, creation evolves from subtle, actually from the transcendental plane, Vasudeva plane, to the gross plane of this solid matter. And similarly, our identity in this material world is flowing in the same way. From our pure spiritual identity into this subconscious state, this Shushukti state, which is we can say the soil of our desires, the dark, fertile soil of our desires. The seeds of desire are implanted in this Shushukti state. And then the desires grow up out of this into the mind. And this is the next phase. The subtle body. Mind, intelligence, false ego. And then when desires are manifest there, as you know, like it says in Gita, that one is contemplating these desires and feeling calm, feeling strong urges to satisfy these desires. Then we come to the sensual level, the level of this body. And then we act to satisfy these desires. So, oh yes. Now, we can give a little more detail in what we've just explained. We've explained the three modes of nature.
Kolme luonnonlaatua.
Yeah, so there are three kinds of ahamkara.
On kolmenlaista ahaa.
Vaikarika ahamkara. False ego in the mode of goodness.
Joka on hyvyyden luonnonlaadussa.
So this this is the identification with the mind.
Samaistuminen mieleen.
Those who identify with the mind, they're in a kind of false ego in the mode of goodness.
Sellaiset henkilöt,
And
jotka samaistuvat itsensä mieleen, ovat hyvyyden laadussa.
Associated with this mind,
Ja tähän mieleen liittyy
there's a deity of the mind actually. The deity is Aniruddha,
Aniruddha,
the fourth of the Chaturvyuha.
neljäs Chaturvyuhasta.
So he's the deity of the mind, and he's manifest as Kshirodakshari Vishnu, the Paramatma. And along with him, there are demigods: Chandra, Dik, Vayu, Surya, Varuna, and the Ashwini Kumaras. So these demigods, they are, Chandra is of course the immediate lord of the mind, Dik is the manager of the ear, the controller of the ear, Vayu of the skin, Surya of the eye, Varuna of the tongue, and the Ashwini Kumaras of the nose. Ashwini Kumaras are twin demigods, so the nose has two nostrils, so there are two demigods there. And then for Karmendriyas, Agni, voice, Indra, hands, Upendra, feet, Prajapati, the genital, Mitra, the anus. And so this is Paramatma and these associated demigods. And this is all within the heart of every living entity. So in this way, our body is a kind, again, a microcosm, a kind of replica of the greater universe. And another sense of this replication is the Vedic scriptures speak of 5 koshas, 5 layers, so to speak, of conditioned consciousness. The Lord explained what conditioning is. So the first layer is called Annamaya, which is the sense of that life requires food. In other words, life energy is identified with eating. Annamaya, kosh, and that particular conditioning is prevalent here in this earthly realm of the universe. The living entities here in this region of the universe, this earth planet, but there are many other planets on the same level. We have gross physical bodies that subsist through eating. So this is not only a layer of consciousness within us, but within the whole universe. At this level of physical embodiment. Then there's the pranamaya, which is identifying life with movement, with sensory functions. So yes, we are conditioned by that also. This is a finer layer of conditioning than the annamaya, than the desire for food. And this conditioning is seen up to the Bhuvar Loka, which is up to the moon planet. The moon planet is a heavenly planet, a subtle planet, finer than here on Earth. That's why we can't see anything on the moon when we look at it, except just dust and rocks. There is something there, there is life there, but it's on this finer level of pranamaya. And this is in our body too, the linga sharira, the subtle body. Annamaya means this gross body, and pranamaya means the linga sharira, subtle body, as does the next level, which is called manomaya. Mano means mind, the mental functions. So this is also within the linga sharira, subtle body, and this is prevalent in the region of the universe called Svargalok. Svargalok, heaven, which is Indradev is the lord of that region of the universe. And the predominant, oh yes, we should speak of the elements. Annamaya, the predominant element is Bhumi, earth. Pranamaya, the predominant element is Apa, or water. And Manomaya, the predominant element is Agni, or fire.
Ja Manomayasta tuli.
Then there's Vijnanamaya, the intellectual plane. That is also within the Linga Sharira. And that in the universe is prevalent at Maharloka,
Ja seuraava on
where again
Pranamaya.
Agni, fire, is predominant. So then we come to Anandamaya. Anandamaya
Brahmalokalla asti.
is the bliss of the living entity, separate from these other stages. This is beginning of liberation. So in the regions of the universe, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Satyaloka, there is Lord Brahma, there are the four Kumaras, there are great sages. So they are practically on the liberated platform. That means not necessarily liberated in Krishna consciousness, but at least liberated in the Brahmananda, in knowing the bliss of Brahman, knowing the bliss of themselves as being spirit soul apart from body and mind. So this Anandamaya, yes, this is experienced within the, not within Shtula Sharira, gross body, Anandamaya level, or even subtle body, Linga Sharira level, but this Karana Deha, causal body level. So this is the yogic state, the state of trance. So those who are accomplished in trance and suspending the movement of the life airs and withdrawing the consciousness from the physical senses and even the subtle workings of the mind, then they are promoted to these higher planetary systems, Janaloka, Tapaloka, Satyaloka. And they exist there in the Karana Deha, causal body, and they're experiencing Anandamaya, the bliss of the self, separate from material designation. So this is quite a lot of information. This is going to lead us into tomorrow's lecture. I think we can actually finish this all tomorrow. Or maybe not. Or maybe we will. We'll see. I think we can probably cram everything in. Tomorrow I want to, based on everything I told you now, I will go into the psychology of Bhakti Yoga, the actual system of psychology of Bhakti Yoga that is taught by Sri Ramanujacharya, the great Vaishnavacharya of the Sri Sampradaya. So we need to know what we learned today in order to understand this system of psychology that Ramanujacharya has taught. In other words, what he's teaching is putting all of these components that we've learned about today together in a working form and showing us how by bhakti we use the mind and the senses and all of this field of ingredients I told you about, the field of activities. How we use it to go back home, back to Godhead. So this is very interesting. So, I think it's good to stop now and see if there are any questions. This is, quite a lot of information, and it's important that we nail this down so that everyone understands it. Yes?
Guru Maharaj, some time ago we had discussions from Kriyat Bhagavat about this new, the second version or second part of Kriyat Bhagavat, that there is this descriptions of these different layers of the universe. Somebody quoted, or somebody had heard from some of your godbrothers that if we are like acting in Sankirtan movement and Krishna consciousness in like a realized level, we are like experiencing this also this different consciousness in different parts of the universe. And also like in different ages, like Satya Yuga and Treta Yuga, this elevated consciousness, they are like included in Krishna consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So can you confirm this or a little bit elaborate? So
yes, well, I think that is going to bring us into what we want to talk about tomorrow. So I'd rather not go into that now. That's more or less the subject matter of tomorrow's talk. Yes?
Guru Maharaj, how does this fourfold scheme you presented on the evolution of the universe, how does it correspond to the gunas?
Oh yes. So this first stage, Shushupti,
Ensimmäinen taso Suhotra,
which is manifest with Mahavishnu.
joka ilmenee Mahavishnu.
This is Tamoguna, primordial Tamoguna, tamas.
Alkuperäinen tamaguna.
This is the tamasa ahankara. And then
Tamassa.
the second stage is Rajoguna,
Seuraava vaihe on Rajaguna.
this dreaming state, Svapna,
Uneksiva.
Hiranyagarbha manifestation.
Hiranyagarbha.
And then the Jagrata, the waking state, when Paramatma comes in the heart
Ja Jagrata on
with the living entity, and the living entity becomes awakened
elävän kanssa.
to his activities in the body. This is the mode of goodness.
Tämä on hyvyyden puolella.
And beyond all that, of course, is the Vasudeva Sattva,
Tämä on
pure
kaikki tuolla
goodness.
puolella Vasudevassa.
Yes.
I find it difficult to understand because of course the first state of pure consciousness, Turiya, that's the least conditioned state. But then it seems like, of course, the conditioning goes on and becomes stronger and stronger for each stage. But still the gunas, they seem to go in the opposite direction.
Yes.
That in the second state we have tamas, and then to the so-called better gunas.
Yes. Yes. But you have to understand that these are, this tamoguna is the primordial tamoguna. This is the ignorance that the living entity has to enter into in order to proceed in the process of creation. This is the step of forgetfulness of his identity as spirit soul, forgetfulness of his relationship to Krishna. And then, with that as the background, then his desires manifest in the mode of passion. And then, when he has a body and Paramatma is there in the heart with him side by side, then this is mode of goodness, but you have to understand this is like very, in comparison with that vast tamas at the beginning stage of creation, this is like a very little bubble of goodness that he's in, you see, in this body. Just it's considered to be in the mode of goodness just to be awake to one's activities. You see, of course, the other modes are also in play too. But this surfacing of the consciousness with some clarity in a body, with senses, this information, that is mode of goodness. But it's a little bubble of goodness within a great ocean of tamoguna, more or less. And then there's a little film of rajaguna on the top. And then these little bubbles, individual bubbles of sattva. So this is actually how the creation proceeds. Basically, everything is in the tamoguna. And this is what we return to every night. We return to that in our sleep. Back to that root state of tamas.
Could I ask something?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure if I've understood this correctly, but just to clarify. Is it so that at the very beginning, before we came into contact with the material energy, there was pure consciousness?
Yes.
So by definition, surely that's pure or perfect. But yet there was some sort of desire to be Krishna, and that's why we are here.
Yes.
So it just seems to be in conflict to have pure consciousness and to have that
Yes.
impure desire.
Yeah. Yes, well, this Vasudeva Sattva state, it is pure consciousness, but it's not the ultimate consciousness. The ultimate consciousness is Ananda Chinmaya Rasa. And this is in rasa, in loving relationship with Krishna, in his lila, in the transcendental world. This Vasudeva Sattva state is, we can look at it the other way. It's like when one has transcended this world and is looking back on this world Actually, I wanted to explain this later, in a later class tomorrow, I guess, but when one is looking back on this world and seeing everything clearly, that is Vasudeva Sattva. Vasudeva Sattva is seeing this field of activities clearly without any attachment to it. So in Vasudeva Sattva there is a consciousness of the material world, but one is above it. You see? And one is seeing this display still as the energy of the Lord. You see? But Srila Prabhupada calls this, when he's talking of Vasudeva Sattva, he calls this Krishna consciousness. This is not the same kind of Krishna consciousness in Goloka Vrindavan. This is consciousness of Krishna, again, as Vasudeva, displaying his creative opulence, his vibhuti. So when the living entity is there and seeing all this very clearly, then he's in a pure state, he's in a transcendental state. But he can become attracted in that state. He can become attracted to enter into this display of energy. You see, so this is where the case of fall down, the question of fall down actually begins here. He can enter into, like Srila Prabhupada says, the original, in 9th canto of Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada says, the original position of the living entity, his first position in this material world was as Brahma, the creator, demigod of creation. We explained him appearing on the lotus navel. So Brahma he's in this Vasudeva consciousness. He's seeing very clearly all the ingredients of creation because he uses this as his design, that's his reference for his work of creation of the physical universe. So he's certainly in this Vasudeva Sattva. But because he does this work of creation, he becomes attached to it. You see? He may start to think, I've done this is my creation, I'm worshipped by all the lesser beings in the whole universe, as the giver of the Vedic knowledge, as the creator, as the master of the Vedas, and so on. So in this way, Brahma can become conditioned by material nature. And so it is explained by Srila Prabhupada that these personalities like Brahma and others who are in this uppermost region of the universe, Brahmaloka, Tapaloka, Janaloka, like that, they go back at the end of the cosmic manifestation, when everything is dissolved. They go back to Mahavishnu by dint of their consciousness, their meditative consciousness. They're always meditating on the Lord. They go back to Mahavishnu. But Mahavishnu, he will again breathe out more universes. Again, the cycle of creation will begin. So if they desire a second time to go into the creative process, then Prabhupada says that is considered their fall down. You see, the first time they come is just by the order of the Lord. The second time they go is they have their own interest to go. They assume this identity for themselves. I have a very important function in creation. I'm Brahma, I'm some great sage or something. And I have to go back and fulfill that function again. So this is actually where they're showing their attachment. And then they become entangled in Maya and can't come out a third time. So Srila Prabhupada confirmed this. He was asked this directly about Brahma, whether Brahma becomes entangled in creation by being attached to his work as the creator. Prabhupada confirmed this. So when you want to study where is because this is often a big question, where exactly is the fall down of the living entity? So this is actually where it is, when the living entity becomes attached to a post within this material world. Otherwise, before that, everything is still lila. I was explaining in previous class, this process of the creation that we just described today in detail is the Vyavahara lila. It's the lila of the Lord in relationship to his material energy. So Krishna, he is manifesting creation, maintenance, destruction of the material world.
Luomisen
He himself is always transcendental to it. He's not attached to
Hän ei ole kiintynyt
this display of creative potency. And
näytökseen.
he has his eternal associates with him.
Hänellä on ikuiset seuralaiset mukana.
I forget what someone was asking about these prototype demigods, and I was explaining how they're in the manifest in the layers of the universe. There is fire in the layers of the universe, and water. All these elements are there, 7 layers. So these are prototype demigods. These are personal associates of the Lord. They're not empowered jivas within the universe. Those are conditioned souls. But these eternal associates of the Lord, so they are participating in the process of creation. But like the Lord, they're not entangled. They're not entangled in creation. So it's just some living entities become captivated by Maya, and they don't return to the Lord after the display. They want to remain within this cosmos. Anything else? Alright, so we will continue tomorrow evening discussing the system of psychology of Bhakti Yoga that is taught by Sri Ramanujacharya.